So I'm Jennifer Chase. I am the founding dean of the Berkeley College of Computing, Data Science, and Society. And I am thrilled to welcome all of you to the Dean's first, the inaugural Dean's Distinguished Lecture. Yes. And I chose very carefully for our first Dean's Distinguished Lecture. I'm absolutely thrilled that Gerald Chan accepted and that he came up with such an appropriate lecture for us. The name of his lecture is Rethinking Clark Kerr, the Uses of the University in the Age of Generative AI. And for those of you who are young, you may not know who Clark Kerr was. Clark Kerr was the chancellor of Berkeley from 1952 to 1958. And then he was the president of the UC system from 1958 to 1967. Clark Kerr personified the golden age of higher education in the mid-20th century and defined the modern university, particularly in his legendary 1963 treatise, The Uses of the University. Today, Gerald is going to discuss how events since the time of Clark Kerr, and particularly recent events in AI and generative AI, have changed the landscape and indeed the uses of the university. So let me tell you a little bit about Gerald Chan. He is a scientist, a global leader in biotechnology, and a venture capitalist who has, through his many startups and support of ventures, transformed the medical landscape. He started over a dozen companies. His work has resulted in first-class drugs, diagnostics, and medical devices approved by regulatory agencies for use in the clinic, which is a very high bar. In recent years, his work has focused on AI to develop digital biomarkers, digital diagnostics, and therapeutics for dementia, autism, and behavioral disorders. Deployed at the population level, his work is changing healthcare by improving clinical outcomes for patients, lowering healthcare costs, and making healthcare more accessible. He's really leading the way in the future of healthcare. And so please join me in welcoming Gerald to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What a pleasure to be here at Berkeley. Well, I thought, there wouldn't be a more appropriate place to talk about Clark Kerr than in Berkeley. So when Jennifer asked me to give this talk, I thought, what am I going to talk about? It's in the College of Computing, Data Science, so it has to be related. Berkeley, being such a hub, and the leading edge of AI, well, got to do that. But, let's also look back and reflect, Clark Kerr being such a giant in higher education in America. And I'm afraid, I totally understand why Jennifer said this. The younger people, they would say, who's Clark Kerr? Only old folks like us, we revere Clark Kerr. And so in 1963, Clark Kerr gave the Godkin Lecture at Harvard University. And he entitled his first, it was a series of 3 lectures, and he entitled his first lecture, The Idea of the Multiversity, clearly as a rejoinder to John Henry Newman's classic, The Idea of the University. But the overarching title he gave to the 3-lecture series is The Uses of the University. And to this day, these 3 lectures stand as a major landmark in the history of higher education in America. So I'd like to begin with Clark Kerr's use of the word uses. The content of his lectures give very little insight into why he chose the word as a rubric for his talks. Perhaps one should not be surprised, considering Clark Kerr was an economist, and economists are about utility. So was Kerr just defaulting to his mental habit as an economist, or was there a specific intentionality in using the word uses? We will never know for sure, but by giving this title to his prominent lectures, Kerr had gently banished the thought that the university is so transcendent an institution that it is taboo to talk about its uses. So the tone was set that the university is expected to deliver utilitarian value. And in using the word uses in plural, Kerr recognized that the university, by now the multiversity, had many uses, but he had no time for the assorted and sundry uses of the university. His view of uses was informed by Francis Bacon, a seminal figure in the English Enlightenment. In saying knowledge is power, Bacon meant that the power to subdue nature. For him, understanding nature was not enough. That knowledge had to be used to free man from the scourge of nature, or to harness the power of nature for the benefit of mankind. So in today's jargon, knowledge should become a driver of innovation to benefit society. On this point, Kerr was entirely aligned with the historical nature of the American university. Thomas Jefferson, in founding University of Virginia, emphasized science and practical knowledge. The largest growth spurt of higher education in America, the founding of the land-grant universities pursuant to the Morrill Act of 1862, was decidedly use-inspired. Hence, its emphasis on teaching, research, and community service in agriculture, engineering, and military science. Kerr was ahead of his time in coining the term the knowledge industry and foresaw the university at the center of it. Mid-century America was a picture-perfect depiction of how the university can be of use to society. World War II was won by science and technology. From the radar to the bomb, research done in university helped America to win the war. In the peacetime that followed, university research was a wellspring from which flowed a steady stream of groundbreaking advances, from plastics to electronics, from the polio vaccine to organ transplantation, from computers to space exploration. Never in human history has there been a time when the standard of living of a country was so elevated by research and innovation, nor was there a material prosperity that was so broadly shared by all of society. Society at large benefited from the university's work and therefore had a stake in the health of the higher education sector. Add to this the Sputnik moment. America's answer to that crisis was education. Congress swiftly passed the National Defense Education Act in 1958 to strengthen education in science, mathematics, and foreign languages. University education became a critical buttress to national security. From the Second World War through the Cold War, there was a bond between the American people and the American universities, an implicit social contract. The federal government poured money into research grants for universities. State governments pay for the operation of the state universities. The GI Bill, one of the most creative social innovations of all times, thrust myriads of American young people into the universities. From 1960 to 1970, enrollment in American universities doubled from 3.6 million to 7.5 million. This bond was shattered by the campus protests of the free speech movement, the civil rights movement, and the anti-Vietnam War movement. The trust that American people had for higher education began to fray. Fast forward to today. In a Gallup poll published in July 2024, only 36% of Americans had a great deal of confidence in higher education. 32% had some confidence, and 32% had little to no confidence. This decline of confidence is true for all Americans, irrespective of their political persuasion, educational level, gender, and age, and race. The main complaints of the public were extreme imbalance of cultural and political views on campus, irrelevance of what was being taught, and runaway costs of higher education. If American higher education were a business, the strategists would say that customer satisfaction is abysmal. Even more worrisome is that the addressable market for higher education is contracting. Fertility rate in America today is half of what it was when Kerr gave his Godkin lectures. The Great Recession of 2008 coincided with America's fertility rate falling below replacement level. It is no wonder that many colleges are now struggling to fill their classes. In each of the last 10 years, a dozen or two nonprofit four-year colleges around the country have ceased operation. The number of closure of for-profit colleges was many times larger. College closing is usually the end result of a lengthy process of adjustment that finally failed. College administrators see how broken is their value proposition and their business model, and therefore the imperativeness of change. The faculty, on the other hand, is often the obstacle to change. In a recently published book, Brian Rosenberg, the former president of Macalester College, which is a liberal arts college in Minnesota, the book talked about the resistance that the faculty put up against any change. In resisting the downsizing of a department that had more professors than students majoring in that subject, a faculty member denounced the requirement to balance the books as capitalists, and that the practice should have no place in the functioning of a liberal arts college. It is no wonder that Rosenberg entitled his book, "Whatever It Is, I'm Against It." Subtitle, Resistance to Change in Higher Education. Sadly, many colleges, the handwriting is on the wall. Demographics is destiny, and finance is unforgiving. So in the face of this bleak state of affairs, enter generative AI, which will undoubtedly both be a game changer and an opportunity for every facet of society. Higher education is no exception. When ChatGPT can recall and process more information than any person possibly can, we will have to evolve our thinking on what constitutes an educated person, and with that, how do we educate? How will generative AI change education? As the internet is about content or knowledge, generative AI is about pedagogy. If the internet had turned the availability of knowledge from scarcity to abundance for the everyday man, AI is turning pedagogy from one-size-fits-all to personalization. Consider this analogy. In medicine today, we practice personalized medicine. All breast cancers in the old days used to be thought of as one disease, but today we have a panel of molecular biomarkers for each patient's breast cancer. And depending on the biomarkers, we use different drugs to treat each patient's cancer. If medicine had become personalized, why is education stuck in one-size-fits-all? At the center of one-size-fits-all teaching is the lecture. Why am I here? Lecturing is an educational modality that is most appropriate when the number of learners is large and the number of available teachers small. The teacher, a scarce resource, must be amortized across a lecture hall full of learners. Lecturing is a teacher-centric modality. It delivers passive learning. A lecture amounts to material taught. It is agnostic to whether the material is learned. Its focus is on the input to the student's education rather than on the output. The behavior of college students today is revealing. If you sat at the back of the lecture hall and look at the screens of the students' open laptops, it is clear most of them are parallel processing some other task while the professor is lecturing. For schools that record their lectures, many students don't even bother to show up in class. In the comfort of their dorm rooms, they play the video of the lecture at the speed of 1.5 to 2x. Now, lest you think I'm exaggerating, the popular introductory courses at Harvard College, I'm from Boston, so my closest affiliation is with Harvard. The introductory courses like in economics, in statistics, those courses have 600 to 800 students. Only 100 to 200 show up for the lectures regularly. In the fall term of 2024, just the last term, the editorial board of the Harvard Crimson, which is the undergraduate newspaper, student newspaper, ran 2 editorials. One is entitled, "Harvard is a school we need to go to class." It calls for making class attendance mandatory. The other is entitled, "Nobody pays attention in class at Harvard. It's time to change that." It calls for the banning of laptops in class. The statement the students are making by their action is that lectures are not where the learning takes place. Now, there is no shortage of thoughtful critics of lectures as a main vehicle for delivering education. In 1984, the University of Chicago educational psychologist Benjamin Bloom published a control experiment. He showed that in a classroom setting, instead of the whole class paced in lockstep, if each student were required to master the material before moving forward, so-called mastery learning, the performance of the students improved by 1 standard deviation. This is equivalent to the average student in the mastery cohort outperforming 84% of the students taught in the conventional way. Furthermore, if the students were afforded one-on-one tutoring, their performance improved by another standard deviation. The average student in this cohort outperformed 98% of the students taught in the conventional classroom. In many subsequent studies, the benefit of one-on-one tutoring was well established, even if the observed effect size was not as large as that seen in the Bloom experiment. The problem, however, is that one-on-one tutoring requires resources that no school can afford. This conundrum has come to be known as the Bloom's 2 sigma problem. No doubt cost is one major reason why we still practice one-to-many teaching. The answer lies in the use of technology, including AI agents, to deliver content. This is typically done now in small segments, followed by assessment of the student's mastery of the material. The student can ask questions to the AI agent, which acts like a personal tutor. It is constantly analyzing the student's feedback and accordingly delivering bespoke material to help the student overcome any learning impediments. This way of delivery incorporates both Bloom's first sigma of improvement coming from mastery learning and his second sigma of improvement coming from one-on-one tutoring. Moreover, the AI agent keeps a memory of all past encounters with the students, knows his learning style, and teaches accordingly. If a student has an area of weakness, either from lack of prior exposure or from a mental block, the AI agent can repeatedly reinforce those areas of weakness and bring the student through to mastery of the subject. In the school year of 2023, 2 instructors of the introductory physics course at Harvard experimented with students taught either by in-person teaching or by agentic AI tutoring. In fact, the tutoring cohort were not allowed to come to class. The outcome data shows that with AI tutoring, the students learned faster and the learning gains were double that of in-person teaching. Moreover, the students felt more engaged and motivated. This study is now being published. I've seen the preprint. It may already be out there. The author's name is Kelly Miller. She's one of the 2. So you might want to take a look at that. So these early data points are extremely encouraging. Now, as to scale, the one school that has used technology to develop education at scale is Arizona State University. That school has invested massively in education technology, massive even by private sector standard. When this way of teaching was applied to the introductory biology course, the pass rate jumped to 90% from a historic pass rate in the low double digits. Affirming, the kinds of effect size seen in the Bloom experiment is indeed possible. Considering ASU admits any Arizona resident with a high school GPA of 3.0 or better, it is evident that there is a real effect here from the new way of teaching and that they're not merely, seeing a selection bias. For sheer scale, ASU now has 9,000 biology majors, 30,000 students majoring in engineering. They graduate 7,000 engineers every year, and these graduates have now established very, very decent salary that they can command in the job market. So impressive as these early results are, we are really only in the first inning of agentic AI. People like Bill Gates, have predicted that the world will have more agents than people. And agents will do everything, for us in our everyday life. The unlimited scalability of intelligence is what makes agentic AI so powerful. Education is the perfect use case for agentic AI because educational resources around the world are both inadequate and unevenly distributed. High-quality education resources are even more inadequate and unevenly distributed. This shortage has created a perverse perception that in higher education, difficulty of access is an indicator of excellence. A university that denies admission to 97% of its applicants is seen as a better school than a university that rejects only 80% of its applicants because it is more highly selective. It is time we change the perception of quality from intake to outcome. I appreciate Scott Galloway from NYU, who also has a Berkeley connection. He said in a TED Talk that higher education is about taking unremarkable kids and giving them a shot at being remarkable. Himself, being a prime example, he got into Harvard with a 2.37 GPA. This is all in his TED Talk. So deploying agentic AI in education offers the best hope for solving the conundrum of access and quality, a problem that had exercised Clark Kerr and for which the California Master Plan for Higher Education was meant to alleviate. So what then becomes of the professor if the primary task is no longer content delivery? If knowledge transfer were all there is to education, agentic AI would indeed render professors superfluous. But this is far from the case. There is still great need and plenty of room for professors to have impact on their students. Each professor will have to define his own excellence in teaching with agentic AI, which may range from being a learning coach to addressing the higher objectives of education. Along with knowledge acquisition, the students need to make sense and be able to make use of what they are learning. This is where a great professor comes in. He makes the subject matter come alive and inspires the student to love it. He provides context, relevance, applications, dots to connect. He showcases potentialities, gives glimpses into the future. He both excites the learner's mind and shapes his intellect. He leads the student to think, to analyze, to see relationships, to assemble ideas, to develop larger and richer thoughts, and to have his own voice. In so doing, long after the student has forgotten what he learned in the course, all the knowledge that he learned had become pedestrian or obsolete, he will be in possession of the intellect that is fertile, supple, excitable, energetic, incisive, and discriminating. An intellect that will serve him well in his lifelong learning. All good education should leave behind in the student something that is indelible, something that has become part of him. The impact of a great professor goes beyond mere knowledge transfer. He actually changes lives. The challenge in education is therefore one of knitting together what technology is good at and what humans are good at. Education is always a human and social activity. Students need teachers. Students need to come together to learn together. But we must reimagine the classroom, re-examining each aspect of the education process and redesigning the educational experience and outcome. Now, mindful of Clark Kerr's concern for the risk of the faculty becoming preoccupied with research, funding, and prestige, these are his words, and practicing what he called scandalous neglect of the undergraduates, I like to offer two other suggestions regarding the education of undergraduates. One is to incorporate more experiential learning into the curriculum. This may be in the form of project-based learning. Industry internship offers great experiential learning. It is a bridge between a student's life before graduation and after. The university should do more to help students access internship opportunities so that they are not available only to the privileged who have connections. The stellar example of this work is Northeastern University in Boston. They have spent years building up connections with industry for the purpose of student internship. These internships, they call it co-ops there. They are semester-long, full-time, and paid positions. I met a young lady majoring in biochemistry at Northeastern a couple of years ago. She wanted to work in the biotech industry after college. In the course of her 4 years at Northeastern, she spent one semester working in a wet lab of a major pharmaceutical company outside Boston. She then had a second co-op in a business development department of a biotech company. By carefully choosing these two co-op experiments, she had acquired a thorough understanding of the biotech industry by the time she graduated. For those of us who are in the private sector, offering internship is a good thing to do for the young people. It is our partnership with universities to prepare the future workforce. Among my friends who run companies in the Boston area, we vie for Northeastern interns. And any intern that is any good is snapped up with an offer of a permanent job before he graduates. So in this day and age when employers are competing for talent, offering internship, in fact, gives us a leg up. Short of actually working in industry internship, there is a weaker form of experiential learning that can be widely available, and that is the use of case studies. Even though the case study method is mostly practiced in business schools, it should not be thought of as a pedagogical tool only for business schools. It has much more general application. Advocates of the liberal arts approach to education have long championed the Socratic method. At its core, the case study method is a Socratic method. Its goal is to stretch the learners beyond the facts he has acquired, and in so doing, develop both the rigor and the creativity of the learner's intellect. He has to engage with the material critically in order to go beyond it. He has to be original, or, if I may borrow a term from people who work in entrepreneurship and innovation, he has to ideate, which is the identification of unmet needs or unsolved problems and coming up with novel solutions. Such ideation leads to a course of action. It may be in the form of a business plan, which forms the basis of a startup. This process of ideation is really no different from what we call hypothesis generation in science. Based on the hypothesis, one designs experiments which may lead to publishable results. This is how scientific progress is made. Whether it is doing a business plan or planning scientific experiments, the principle is the same. The goal is for the student to go beyond the learned material, to go from the historic to the original, from the known to the unknown, and from the bounded to the unbounded. What I'm suggesting here is that the case study method can be a tool to bring us back to the kernel of a liberal arts education. It is a rejection of the bastardized interpretation of a liberal arts education to mean anything that is non-vocational. It is also a rejection of the assertion that a liberal arts education can only be delivered in the domain of the classics or the humanities. A liberal arts education is not a matter of subject matter or field of study. Lost my sheet. So it is not a matter of subject or or the field of study. It is a pedagogy with the aim of developing the learner's intellect. A former dean of the Harvard Business School once told me that the HBS education is a liberal arts education in business. And similarly, recently, the dean of the Yale Medical School said to me the same thing. She said that Yale medical education is a liberal arts education in medicine. I cannot agree with them more. In the age of generative AI, I do not see any less need for students to go beyond mere knowledge acquisition to learning how to think, but we must enlarge the tent of what we call a liberal arts education. My second suggestion is that the faculty ranks in universities need qualitative diversification. There should be a greater porosity for people to move between academia and industry. Historically, that flow has been overwhelmingly one way from academia to industry. We must have workable mechanisms for people from industry to come and be part of the work of the university and the education experience of the students. How much richer it would be if a course can be co-taught by a faculty member who has published in the field with a faculty member who has practiced in that field. Last year, I sat in on a course on AI at Harvard College. It was a general education course intended for undergraduates of all majors. One session I attended was on AI and healthcare. There were several mid-career Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative fellows auditing the class. This is a program, where mid-career people came back, to pivot, usually to go into not-for-profit work. So among those fellows in the classroom, one was a radiologist, another had run an emergency department in a hospital. When they participated, in the discussion, and the professor conducted the class in a very interactive way, that discussion was so rich that I dare say if the classroom was filled only with, 19-year-olds, that discussion could never have reached that level of richness. Those undergraduates were indeed fortunate to have those ALI fellows in the room. In another case, and as an example, a colleague of mine in my office told me that the most impactful course she ever took as an undergraduate was a pharmacology course where a scientist from Merck came to talk about the development of the leukotriene receptor antagonist drug for asthma. It was the first time she heard a complete story of how a drug was developed. She thought it was so interesting that she sought a summer internship at Merck. And after graduate school, she chose a career in drug development. In her words, an encounter of 1 hour with an industry scientist set her on her career path. Curricula in university today tend to be designed by academics for academics, even though only a tiny fraction of graduates will go on to work in academia. Even those graduates who are interested in research will find that research jobs are more abundant in the private sector, where financial support for research is much more generous. At least in the fields of life science and AI, industry has moved upstream to do fundamental research that used to be done only in academia. Witness the breakthrough of AlphaFold and the transformer coming from research done in industry. So working in industry and winning the Nobel Prize are no longer mutually exclusive. If academia does not build more porosity with industry, it risks being marginalized. Several years ago, on one of my visits to Berkeley, my friends from the School of Public Health told me that of this survey, which showed that a third of the students throughout the UC system had some form of food insecurity. It is no wonder that students today are anxious about their future. They are very much looking for relevance of what they are learning to their own educational journey, to their career aspiration, and to the world that they see ahead of them. The university as an insular ivory tower will no longer suffice to serve these students' needs. A Harvard undergraduate recently talked to me about the absurdity he saw in this insularity. He asked his professor in a computer science course, why was he learning that material? He was not being obnoxious or challenging to the professor. He was genuinely looking for relevance. His professor told him he had to learn the material because it's prerequisite for the next course. The student was stunned by the trivial reasoning of his professor, who clearly lived in a closed system where everything is self-referential. I liken higher education today to a neural network whose error function is trapped in a local minimum. A more global minimum lies somewhere out there, but one will have to venture out to a larger and uncharted space in order to find it. In optimization work, you know better than I do, one practice at such a juncture is to inject some random numbers into the process to extricate the neural net from being stuck. Now, if my talk today had injected some random numbers into your thinking, I will have accomplished what I set out to do. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow. Why don't you take, that was incredible. Why don't you take the center seat, and I would like to introduce someone who needs no introduction, Chancellor Rich Lyons, who is our 12th Chancellor, was Dean of the Haas Business School, and just before becoming Chancellor for 5 or 6 years, was Associate Vice Chancellor for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. So I don't think we could have delivered a better Chancellor to you right now for this discussion. Okay, that was just amazing. I've got a few questions, and the audience has submitted questions in advance, and so I'm just going to get right to it. So first, for Rich, we know that the widespread adoption of generative AI has already begun to change education and research in the academy. As we've just heard from Gerald, we need to do this much more thoroughly and much faster. What are your concerns, and what do you see as the opportunities?
Well, thanks. It's a big question. Thank you, Gerald, for your thinking. You know, you did talk about lectures, and but there's something about a public lecture. I think if we actually played the tape back and looked at the preparation that Clark Kerr put into those lectures, which became the book, that public lecture concentrates the mind. It's an act of creation. Not every lecture is that. And I just want to distinguish that, because your lecture was an act of creation, and we appreciate it. But let me answer the question. That wasn't the question. You know, we have to be vigilant about the impact of AI. This is a much discussed and appropriately so question, so I'm not going to add a lot of depth there. But let me offer a couple of opportunity elements, and then I think, you know, some elements that we're already focused on. But here's one slice that's, so I'd love your idea of sort of, you know, the tutor, the scaffold, the ability for people to sort of learn in new ways, which is of course an important enabling. Here's one of the things when I think institution-wide, the whole of UC Berkeley, for example. So I'm an economist. That's my field. Economists kind of like to write down models of two different categories. One is an incomplete information model. It's like the world has incomplete information. I don't know every course that's going on at Berkeley or every event I might go to in the next hour, right? We live in an incomplete information. But we sometimes like to think about, well, what would a complete information version of this model or this world look like? And how would we behave differently? And those are helpful thought experiments, even if we know the world will never be complete. What's the relevance to this question? If you thought about the value of Berkeley as an institution, look, there's just no question. Berkeley is one of society's most valuable assets. No two ways about it. And if we thought about the value of Berkeley to a student, or the value to Berkeley in terms of knowledge creation, or even, the translation of knowledge and impact on the world in various ways, the value of Berkeley equals, well, let's just think about a student and education, just to focus this. The value to sort of students and of our education equals the opportunities that we offer, the programs, the majors, the courses, the faculty, all of that, times is important. Navigability. AI is changing the technology of the navigability of all those assets. We can keep adding assets, and we should, new programs, innovations, courses, etc. But AI is changing that navigability. We can curate. You talked about the personalization of education. That's the projection of his idea onto mine, is that we really are changing that navigability. Or if you thought about, so my last 5 years, as Jennifer mentioned, thinking about innovation and entrepreneurship, it's sort of like, there's so much more going on and so many more opportunities than any of us know about and that any of our students know about. But we are providing AI-assisted, very curated ways of delivering that. So that's one piece of it. But and that's a very big positive piece. Here's a two-handed piece. That at some point it's like, will this dull our ability to think critically? Or will it enhance it? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people are worried that this will dull. When you talked about sort of the power of the intellect and the ability, stronger thinkers. And of course, that's part of what we do here, right? And jury's out, we don't know. But I think that idea of dependence, how many of us could do a long division problem anytime soon, right? There's certain things that we kind of know will fall away. But actually, I have a more optimistic view even on this question. I think if universities could be perfect at any one thing, one of the things I think they would want to be perfect at is instilling a sense or enlarging the existing sense of curiosity in all of our people. I think a lot of people are here and are completely devoted to this institution because we have a lifelong love affair with ideas and learning. Sorry, I just can't help it. I just can't get enough of it, right? So how do we instill that in more people? And I think part of it is when you put some effort in and you just get a small little delta, it's hard to keep bootstrapping yourself in the world of curiosity. But AI may allow us to get that little extra dose of payoff for every little investment we make in what we're learning or how we're making ourselves better. And I'm quite optimistic that sort of payoff function will change enough that we'll have sort of curiosity in an even stronger way. It'll be a different kind of curiosity. But anyway, so there's so many different ways to answer that big question. Those were two, the navigability. If we can improve navigability by 20%, because there's a multiplication sign there, we've increased the value of Berkeley as an educational institution by 20%. And I think that's important. And then this idea of critical thinking, we've been thinking about it forever. We're going to continue to think about it. I'd like to think that AI will help us get better at delivering stronger critical thinkers, but that's going to take some intentionality.
It's fantastic. Okay. So, Gerald, obviously we should get the collected lectures of Gerald because I was reading one from 2016 before generative AI existed, in which you said, our society and our economy are best served by people who are both civilized by being liberally educated just heard from you what that meant, and empowered by being professionally trained. Plurality of purpose inevitably leads to contradictions in execution. So we have this, we are liberally educated and we're professionally trained, and this plurality of purpose could lead to contradictions in execution. I think it's a very interesting framing of this tension inherent in our university system. How do you think that generative AI, Gerald, makes this plurality of purpose more or less achievable?
Well, so let's start with this plurality of purpose. And now I'm going to go back to Clark Kerr again. I think Clark Kerr, he was an extremely tolerant person. Even in coining that term multiversity, imply in it was this thought, well, you all do your own thing. Everyone does his own thing, in the university. There's no single animating, principle, nor, any standard that everyone, has to conform to or even purpose. I think that, thought of Clark Kerr is really important. We should, try to unify. And in setting up the other UC campuses, Clark Kerr also was quite specific. They are not going to be clones of Berkeley. You do it your way. and so we have, today campuses each with its own character, emphasis, strength, and so forth. So first of all, we don't unify. Every student that comes to any school is a unique, piece of work. How can we accomplish, these multiple purposes of civilizing them with a liberal arts education and yet training them, with a professional education so that they can go out and make a living? That decision is not entirely ours. It's very much the students. We will turn out some kids who are not the least bit civilized by a liberal arts education. And that's okay. It's up to them. But as a multiversity, we offer all the resources. And, we talk about reshuffling, the intellectual resources of this great university. So with the view of Gen AI, I must say, I feel I've gotten a lot smarter with Gen AI, but I guarantee you, I wrote every word of this. It wasn't written by ChatGPT. I just think that Gen AI will enable people to drill or delve deeper into any subject. But still, you need prompt engineering. So what I'm thinking is, I think we should build a much broader base for every student. It doesn't need to be very deep. If it wasn't for Gen AI, which would enable them, to plumb the depth themselves, later on. But for the enabling the students to be an efficient and effective user of all that AI ability, I do think students need a very broad base. So we, have distribution requirements, right? I was an engineering major. I had to take, I don't know how many courses in the humanities, blah, blah, blah. I wonder why should we have students take full semester courses? If one semester is 15 weeks, why don't we chop it up into 3 mini semesters of 5 weeks? In the interest of building a broader base for the students. I'm sure a lot of students would not want to commit, one whole semester to some subject, which may be peripheral to what he's interested in. But if you ask him to commit, 5 weeks, I think he may be quite willing to do that. I think, the curriculum design, can really be rejigged, in light of what learning is empowered by Gen AI and how students will learn. So I'm very much in favor of building a broad base, for students, so that in the future, whatever they like, they can delve deeper and learn, from Gen AI.
So my next question, I'll start with you, Gerald, then I'll go to you, Rich. But it is a follow-up, and you've already answered part of it, I think. But following up on this, given the diversity of disciplines in a university, each with its own approach to AI, either, somewhat developed or not really started yet, but each discipline will have its own approach to AI. How can institutions both support a variety of distinct approaches and bring them together to achieve a whole that is greater than the sum of the parts? And is this an opportunity that universities might be uniquely positioned to seize, these different disciplinary approaches to AI, but bringing them together in a whole which is greater than the sum of the parts?
Yeah, I think I sort of partly answered that.
You partly answered.
And again, referring to Clark Kerr's, liberality in letting everyone, do his own thing. I do think every discipline, will have to find, or practitioners in every discipline will have to find his own way of what Gen AI means, for him, for his field, for his research. Everyone have to find equilibrium for himself or herself. But I do feel the curriculum, broadening the curriculum and having requirements, having shorter exposures, I think can build that broad foundation for students, so that they'll be equipped, in the future, to learn. What do you think, Rich?
One of the things that comes to mind for me, and there are many elements of this, is CDSS, right? Our College of Data Science and Society. If somebody said, oh, we have a new college, which we do, and we haven't had one in a long time, but I think people will often think about new colleges as we have, I mean this in no disrespect, but we have a new vertical. And it's sort of like this college needs to be different, right? We're going to have joint appointments of faculty. We're not going to have a faculty here and a faculty over there with a couple of joint appointments. It's like, no, the root concept here is jointness, right? Even if you just went back into Data 8 and you thought about all the connector courses, it's sort of like the connector courses were the thing, right? It's like the network is the computer kind of an idea. Remember that old idea, right? It's actually the links that give it its power. And it has to be. So, when we're thinking about machine learning or AI more narrowly. So that's one of the things that feels to me like it's not easy. This is not easy. We know how hard this is, right? And so anyways, that's one point, is that we had to approach it as a university very differently. I'm not taking any credit for that. That all happened right before I even got into this seat. So I would flag that. The other thing that I would mention is, you talked about resistance to change in higher education. I think that was a phrase. One of the things that I love about Berkeley, and I think we share that in this room, there is a cultural piece to Berkeley that you're just not going to hear presidents of other universities saying. Right? There are a lot of unobjectionable values out there where people would say, yeah, us too. Right? It's sort of like, but what I'm about to say is really here at Berkeley, and I think you would find it difficult for a lot of presidents to stand up and say publicly. And here it is. At Berkeley, there was really this mindset of questioning the status quo. Yeah. There's got to be a better way to do this. And that's not one-to-one with intelligence, right? There are a lot of intelligent people who aren't at the same time thinking there's got to be a better way to do this, right? So this is a little different than saying Berkeley people are just really smart. And not to say that they aren't, but I think so that's part of what I think I'm not saying there's zero resistance to change. That's a human thing, right? But CDSS wasn't easy. Part of why we have not aimed this institution at producing venture-funded startups, because we really care about the civic sector and we really care about the public sector. And Berkeley produces more funded startups than any other university in the world. Yeah. And so how did that happen? Well, there's a lot of culture change and there's a lot of cultural foundation that actually feeds that. And so there's resistance to change everywhere. But I'm biased, but I think Berkeley has some change in its ethos.
I love that, Rich. And being a public university, the resources are always hard to come by, and you got to kowtow to the regions. And I look at what you all have done as a public university with limited resources is truly admirable, as opposed to the East Coast schools that I'm accustomed to that. Well, let's just go find a donor. Somebody will write a check. What's so hot today in the public's mind is DeepSeek, right? I mean, okay, we're going to embargo, chips, and you don't get the latest, NVIDIA chips and all this. Well, you just force them to innovate. Mm-hmm. And to work around it. And I just heard yesterday that here in Berkeley, there's some students that have made a model that is 10 times cheaper. That scrappiness, I just love it. That we have to continue, to innovate in a way that it is not resource constrained in this way. It's this and the attitude and the culture, of, there's got to be a better way. I'm going to do it differently.
So we don't have time to go through all the questions, but I'm now going to pivot at least to one question from the audience, which referred to DeepSeek. So you took me there. And this is for both of you. In a month that has seen the release of DeepSeek and reported changes to data availability on U.S. government websites and many other things, questions of public versus proprietary information or open source versus closed AI models are on our minds. What is the university's role? The university in general and this university in particular, what is the university's role in advancing open science, AI, and the public good? Yeah. I don't know. Do you want to take a crack at that?
Sure. You want me to go first?
Oh, yeah,
please. So part of your idea about DeepSeek, just real quickly, my field is economics, as I mentioned. There's an economic historian I remember studying in graduate school, last name Toynbee, and he talked a lot about the challenge response mechanism, right? It's like when you are challenged, you respond in different ways. What is the nature of the challenge you face? You're almost surely going to come up with creativity that others wouldn't have, partly as a function of the specific challenge that you faced, and that so your account fits wonderfully with that sort of historical framework. Look, one of the interesting things at the university is that there are computer scientists. I'm overgeneralizing, but they are an open source crowd, right? And yes. Berkeley has, when you think of many of the sort of platform technologies that Berkeley has made available to the world from that open source perspective, it's like that's this idea that information and knowledge wants to be free, and Berkeley's a public institution, and so that fits with Berkeley. There's no question about it. And unlike in the life sciences, where really, if you didn't have any IP at all, there's just a lot of stuff that wouldn't be developable because it's too expensive to develop it, right? So, you can make an argument across fields that in one field, society is actually enhanced by having protectable in intellectual property, and in other fields, much, much less so. And I just think, given who we are and this sort of commitment to the public good, the open sourceness and open science-ness of what we do, it's in our DNA. It's not easy to manage, but I think we do a great service. Now, if I could add just a slight wrinkle to that, one of the things that we need to do as a UC Berkeley, a great public research education, right? The root source of Berkeley's preeminence is fundamental research, period. It just is, right? And we need to keep that engine running. So if somebody said, how does Berkeley participate more in that societal and economic value that it is creating through its alumni and so forth, right? When you go to a completely open source model, you start to wonder, well, how does that work? Anyways, one of the things we've been talking to our computer scientists about is, could you imagine when you start a company or when somebody from your lab starts a company, would it make sense to give the university a participation right in a future funding round? Sort of like, well, that's an interest that creates a flow of economics back to the universe. An acceptable one. If we said, no, we would like 10% of your company, nobody would say yes to that, unless there was some quid pro quo. But anyways, I'm talking about the kind of cultural shift where we're in this together, and we do need to fund great research going forward, and we can't compromise our values doing it. Berkeley's not a venture capital fund, but how do we find fresh ways to make sure that engine keeps spinning? And I had conversations with some of the people in this room about exactly this in the last few days. So I will mention that there are next generations of this thinking.
That's what I just so admire about Berkeley. That sense of public service. That I just always am humbled by just seeing the people in these state universities, being committed to the public good. So I think as a university, with all these technical advances, with AI and all that, we have to ask, yes, for whose benefit? If we talk about for society's benefit, surely, so open source is very good. But then, you raise the point about life science, which is what I do. Without patent protection, the time and capital commitment, nobody would do it. I'm right now, still working on a company I started 18 years ago, to pioneer a whole new area of medicine. And I'm still working on it. And hopefully in the next few months, we may get an FDA approval. I think it's one that is, it's not one size fit all. We have to find a way, for the institution to move forward, to satisfy, different stakeholders, and also, to be mindful, that the public good, would be addressed in addition to whatever private good that is needed to motivate commitment of labor and capital.
I'm going to add one thing to that, which is that open source platforms raise the entire ecosystem, and then proprietary companies can be built on top of that. Yes. So the investments that you're putting in, you'll get from those proprietary layers, but the platform itself will create ecosystems on which many, many companies can thrive, can be germinated and can thrive. And so it can be, and I think for Berkeley, it has been a yes and. Okay, Apache Spark came out of the Skylab, Databricks was created on top of it. So we do these things, we're, in computational precision health, and with Fernando Perez, we're building a Jupyter Health platform that will be the fertile ground for proprietary companies, but it will allow a lot more to germinate. It will provide that environment. So I think that this has been such a phenomenal event. I mean, the problem for me is that I can never outdo the inaugural one now, but this was just, I very much hope you publish this lecture and, and I think, I don't know, 62 years from now, somebody might be talking about your lecture on the uses of the university long after, the three of us are no longer here. Some of you will be here. Some of you may be giving that lecture. So, and I think that the pairing of your challenges to the university with our new chancellor who deeply questions the status quo, for whom that is, Rich had a set of values that he established for Haas when he stepped in as dean. And that questioning the status quo was fundamental among them. And so I just love the resonance between the two of you as you ask, how do we question the status quo? How do we make Berkeley better? And how in the process of doing that do we make society better? Thank you so much.